Namaste and welcome everyone again for our webinar today on our Varna and Jati and Caste the same. We have Shri Kalyan Vishwanathan, president of HUA today. Amazing to be with him from 2018 to now 2024, where we are. He's going to be teaching a course this quarter, next quarter on this subject. But with introducing him, I'm just going to say, his 21-year association with Puja Swamiji Dayananda Saraswati really set him on this path, and he can go into his story and explain how he joined us as the leader of HUA. It's been my pleasure to join him as the director of advancement, and this topic, caste, right? It is the stick with which the West continues to beat Hindus into submission. We cannot respond. We don't know what it's about. We differentiate. We should be differentiating more between Varna, Jati, and caste. And there's so many layers to that. So I'm not going to talk too much about that because Kalyanji does it much better than I do. I'm just here to provide the energy, answer your questions. Please let us know if you have any questions, any issues. And if you haven't yet filled out the poll, let me give you a quick second and share it, because we have quite a few people who are new, 14 new people, a lot of regulars and attendees, and even some students. So let me share that, Kalyanji, and just hand it over to you. I know you have a presentation. I think you'll be sharing. I have the PowerPoint and backup if you need. So 15 people, first time joining us on a webinar, 14 regulars, 28 have attended before. We have 5 program enrollees. We are making a concerted effort to grow our program enrollments, so thank you for that. We've got 13 people who have at least taken a course, 20 people who are considering. Glad to have you on. Maybe this is the course that gets you to enroll at HUA, and 13 of you who don't want to take any courses. Well, we're still happy to have you on this webinar and joining and engaging with us in this format. So with that, Kalyanji, who else do we have? Shantaji from Montreal and Ramji from Nepal. Welcome, welcome. Glad to have you on, everyone. Oh, and Satish Tripathi, yes, from Chicago. Okay, Kalyanji, from Dallas to you.
Okay. Namaste, everybody. Ankur, why don't you ping Esther? Make sure she's able to join, okay? All right, so I'm going to begin today by sharing my screen and showing a website to you, to all of you, okay? Now, this website is called the Pew Research Center website. And this is a very prestigious think tank in the United States of America. And those of you who are not familiar with the Pew Research Center, it'd be good for you to get familiar with it, because they write about all sorts of things around the world. And so in June of 2021, June 29, 2021, they published an article, Religion in India, Tolerance and Segregation. Okay. And there was a whole bunch of authors involved in this: Jonathan Evans, Neha Sehgal, Ariana Monique Salazar, etc., etc. Okay, it's a bunch of people. And they begin their article with a statement. The caste system has existed in some form in India for at least 3,000 years. It is a social hierarchy passed down through families, and it can dictate the professions a person can work in, as well as aspects of their social lives, including whom they can marry. In other words, the system, the caste system dictates, who they can marry. It's a kind of a dictation, see? While the caste system originally was for Hindus, nearly all Indians today identify with the caste regardless of their religion. In other words, this thing that the Hindus created for themselves has now spilt over, and it has it has encroached into other religions too in India. Okay, so now even Muslims and Christians and everybody else also have a caste system, a hierarchical system, a social hierarchy passed down through the families, which dictates professions as well as personal choices regarding marriage aspects of their social lives and so on, social lives and so on and so forth. I'm not going to read you the whole article because it is a long article. Just to give you a sense, right? It's a very substantive article. A lot of interesting data. Okay. So this is an American think tank, which is demonstrating expertise, so-called, on the caste system of India. And they're writing an article as recent as just a few years ago. Let me pause there, okay? Now, I'm going to ask you a question to all of you. And just give me a yes or no in the chat window. Do you agree with that first paragraph that the Pew Research Center is articulating as fact? Okay, as a fact, it's a historical fact. Okay, no, not at all. No, absolutely not. Rajashri, no. Okay. Okay, I'm not getting a single yes here so far. Sanjeev is saying yes. Okay, thank you. We got one yes. Okay, answer no. Okay, good. Great. Okay. Now, you see, the thing is, this is the mainstream narrative about caste. Correct? This is what they say. This is the narrative that is embedded in our school textbooks in India, Bharat, in the NCERT textbooks. It is a narrative that's embedded in the social studies, world history, world religions, world cultures kind of curriculum. It is embedded in these textbooks. And at an early age, young people are indoctrinated with this idea that the caste system has existed in India from time immemorial, meaning at least 3,000 years, which is what that article is saying. Okay. Now, by the way, let me welcome Esther, who's joined a little bit late, but Esther, welcome to this discussion. Okay. Now, I'm going to go to a PowerPoint slide and pull up a second quotation from the same website, Pew Research Center. So this is the first quotation. Okay? This is the very first quotation. So I'm just replicating what is there on that website. And in fact, I will even put the link of that website on the, maybe Ankur can look at it and get it and put it on the chat window. So if you want to read up on that page, you're welcome to. Now, there is a second quotation I have pulled out from the same article, same website, same article, and I'm going to show that to you. Now, this is a very interesting quotation. Let's read it together. Not only do most Indians say that lower castes do not experience a lot of discrimination, but a strong majority, 82%, say they have not personally felt caste discrimination in the past 12 months. While members of scheduled castes and tribes are slightly more likely than members of other castes to say they have personally faced caste-based discrimination, fewer than 1 in 5, 17%, say they have experienced this being what? Caste-based discrimination in the last 12 months. Okay, very interesting. Very interesting. So what are they really saying? If you look at that data that I just read out, right? Is it possible to sustain a narrative called the caste system is a discriminatory system by design? It's a discriminatory system by design that has existed for 3,000 years as a discriminatory system. And people every day routinely discriminate and experience discrimination every day in their lives. Okay, is it possible to sustain that narrative? Give me a yes or no, based on what the Pew Research article is saying. What do you think? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. No, we cannot, right? Because the data is overwhelmingly pointing in the opposite direction. In other words, we should understand from this article that discrimination is more of an exception than the norm. Understand, everybody? Exception and the norm. This is very, very important. To draw an analogy, supposing we say every day in the United States of America, approximately 140 people on the average are murdered with gun violence. Suppose I say that. Would I be right? Would I be right or would I be wrong? And those of you who are interested in statistics can go and verify this, right? This is what's going on in the US today. Okay, 140 instances of gun related violence leading to death on a daily basis. Okay, school shootings, shootings in the mall, shootings in the public square, shootings in the downtown, shootings in the shopping centers, shootings in the cinema. I mean, I'm not saying anything that you have not heard, right? Now, supposing we now draw a conclusion called, oh, the people of the United States are a murderous lot. They just routinely kill off their fellow citizens on a daily basis, as many as 140 of them, for no reason at all. I mean, they just love murdering each other. Suppose I say that. Suppose I draw that conclusion. Okay. Would I be right? What do you think? Would I be right? Yes or no? Give me a yes or no in the chat. No, we cannot. Okay. Why? Because the we understand that it's not the norm, it's more of an exception, even though it is a very unacceptable exception. Any civilized modern society should not accept that so many people are killed on a daily basis through gun violence. Okay, but supposing we had a narrative called the people of the United States are a murderous people and they love killing each other, and that narrative kind of hung about on its own, as a kind of a mainstream narrative. It was in all the school textbooks, it was in all the newspapers, and then every instance of a gun related violence, every instance of somebody getting killed due to gun violence can then be held up as more evidence for proving, for demonstrating, for establishing, for confirming that the people of the United States are a murderous community. Is it not? Are you with me? Yeah. Now, you see, this is in some regard what is going on. There is a narrative that has become unhinged, and it exists in its own kind of sphere of ecosystem, in its own echo chamber, that is unconcerned about the data on the ground. Okay. And therefore, when a narrative assumes precedence over the data, in other words, you're no longer producing a narrative based on the data. You're already sure that the narrative is true, and therefore all that you're doing is reconfirming the narrative by looking for incidents that will confirm that narrative, regardless of how frequent they are in the in the billions and billions of interactions that take place amongst Hindus, between various communities, billions and billions of interactions. The fraction of interactions that could be constituted inside the inside the structure of caste-based discrimination, if you use that fraction to prove, to confirm, to demonstrate, to reconfirm, reaffirm, to insist that caste-based discrimination is a feature of the caste system, and it has been so for 3,000 years. Okay, if you do that, then what happens is the narrative is no longer based on fact. It is just a preconceived narrative that is looking for factual confirmation. In some regards, this is what has happened. Let me go into the PowerPoint again. You see, the problem is this narrative has got mass, has got momentum, has got inertia, has got tremendous weight behind it. Freight. It's got freight behind it. Why? Because more than 9,000 books have been written about the caste system. And what it says is there is a hierarchical, oppressive caste system, number one. It is sanctioned by the Vedic texts and traditions. And of course, readily people will quote the Purusha Sukta and the Manusmriti and so on. It is essentially Hindu in character. The Hindus invented it. And by implication, the Brahmins are responsible because they are the origins of this so-called caste system. It needs to be eradicated for India to progress. And Hinduism itself must be either completely dismantled or at least reformed in order to eliminate this oppressive caste system. Okay, so these are the kind of the cornerstones of the mainstream narrative about the caste system. Okay, now this is not what I am saying. This is taken from a book written by Professor Arvind Sharma. He's a very important professor in the field of Hindu studies, and he's written a book in the year 2017 called The Ruler's Gaze. And this is the mainstream narrative of the Hindu caste system. And this narrative is being picked up by people like Oprah Winfrey, who thinks she really knows something about the system, and this brilliant, so-called brilliant book by Isabel Wilkerson, who gives us a masterful portrait of an unseen phenomenon in America through an immersive, deeply researched narrative, stories about real people, and how America today and throughout its history has been shaped by a hidden caste system, a rigid hierarchy of human rankings. Beyond race, class, or other factors, there is a powerful caste system that influences people's lives and behavior in the nation's fate. Linking the caste systems of America, India, and Nazi Germany. Okay, Wilkerson explores 8 pillars that underlie caste systems across civilizations, including divine will, bloodlines, stigma, and more. And Oprah Winfrey was so excited about this book, so taken in by this book, she started freely distributing. She bought like thousands and thousands of copies and decided to send this book freely to a few thousand chief executive officers in the United States of America. And that's in the news. Okay, you can go back and look at it. So this is the new propaganda about caste. And the West won't let go of caste. And of course, you have our own people, Tenmari Soundararajan, to be precise, caste in the United States, a survey conducted by Equality Labs. And Equality Labs is, of course, a very, very serious propaganda machine around this initiative called SB 403 in California, which was narrowly defeated in the state of California Assembly thanks to a veto by Governor Gavin Newsom. However, see, the problem with SB 403 is just a beginning, right? SB 403 is just the beginning. It's not the end. It got vetoed, but it's coming back, I promise you. So the Hindu predicament with regards to SB 403 is as follows. The law, the California law that was introduced as legislation by Senator Aisha Wahab, a Muslim American born in New York City of refugee parents from Afghanistan, who's barely 40 years old, and she thought this was the way to make herself famous, and she introduced this legislation. And what it seeks to do is SB 403 seeks to end caste-based discrimination, where in America, and to impose consequences on people who practice caste-based discrimination and caste-based violence. Remarkable piece of legislation. Now, you see, apparently, SB 403 is getting positioned, apparently, as a response to the widespread incidents of caste-based discrimination and caste-based violence in California. A fact, at least a theory that is not established as fact, but only through rhetoric. Only through rhetoric, meaning there's a group of people screaming at the top of their voice. There is discrimination, there is discrimination, there is discrimination. And it's terrible, it's horrible, it must be defeated, it must be destroyed, and so on and so forth. And the more they generate noise, the more they generate propaganda, the more they insist that it's happening, it leads to senators getting involved, legislators getting involved, and preparing laws to essentially ban caste-based discrimination and caste-based violence. However, the one case that was brought into the limelight in recent times, the one case which was, a state of California versus Sundar Iyer of Cisco, formerly of Cisco. You probably all know about this case. It kind of rolled around for 2.5, 3 years in the courts, where Sundar Iyer was accused for having perpetrated some form of caste-based discrimination against a subordinate, right? That case, after generating a lot of media noise, sort of presumably to reinforce the idea that, okay, here we have found at last an instance of caste-based discrimination, which justifies laws like the SB 403. If you look at what happened to that case, it got dismissed in the court of law outright. And why did it get dismissed in the court of law? It got dismissed because the people who are complaining, they could not establish discrimination. They could not establish, in fact, they could not provide any evidence that this was in fact a case of discrimination. And that's really what happened, right? So here you have the point that the case was not intended to really ever demonstrate the actual reality of caste-based discrimination, but rather the case was used as a backdrop to simply generate a much higher decibel level drumbeat in the media, a media firestorm, claiming, hey, look, we found caste-based discrimination in America. So here it is, we found it. Okay, and after rolling around in the courts for a couple of years, it ended without a whimper. It just kind of disappeared because there was no evidence. Now, this is what we can call an evidence-free narrative. An evidence-free narrative, right? And we must know, as Hindus, we must know that the aftermath, or the outcome, the impact of such evidence-free narratives is it emboldens people to simply accuse somebody of having discriminated against them. If you don't offer a promotion to somebody in your job, if you don't offer an appointment to somebody in a school or college, if you don't offer you know where I'm going with this, that in so many different instances, somebody can now say, I was not given the job, I was not given the promotion, I was not given an offer letter, I was not given an appointment because of caste-based discrimination, sidestepping the complete issue of merit, right? Sidestepping the issue of, were you the best candidate? Were you the most qualified? Were you the most competent? Who were the other candidates? who else was involved in the selection process, and once you get accused, once somebody gets accused of having discriminated against somebody else on the basis of caste, you are in for a protracted legal struggle in the court of law, trying to establish that no, it was not a case of caste-based discrimination. It was a case of simply a merit-based appointment, a merit-based selection. And in the interim period, when the case goes on and on in the court of law, your reputation can be dragged in the mud. and that is the real prospect of this whole affair of reputations of Hindus being dragged in the mud. I mean, and we as Hindus should be very clear. This is what is happening. It is happening as we speak. It will happen in the future. And there is no escaping this, because the forces at play, who are backing this whole narrative is the are determined to establish this. Okay, now let's go back to the presentation. The predicament, the Hindu predicament, is as follows. Okay, if you oppose this a law like SB 403, it will immediately invite the criticism that Hindus are in fact in favor of caste-based discrimination and caste-based violence. You see, after all, how can you oppose a legislation that seeks to end caste-based discrimination? I mean, you cannot oppose it in your right mind, can you? Because opposing it tantamounts to confirming that Hindus are in favor of caste-based discrimination and caste-based violence. So what are Hindus to do? Most Hindus remain silent. They're quiet. Or some of them end up joining SB 403 or the movement in favor of SB 403 or equivalent movements and get in line in favor of such legislations. Again, SB 403 is just the beginning. More is to come in the space. Is Hinduism equal to caste? Unfortunately, that's what Dr. Ambedkar thought. Okay, he was very, very anti-caste. And in fact, if you go back and read Isabel Wilkerson's book, she quotes copiously from Ambedkar. It's like Ambedkar is her guru or something. And she goes on and on, verbatim replicating everything that Ambedkar wrote. And here he's expressing his utter disgust with Hinduism and Hindus. And he says, it's because I'm convinced they cherish wrong ideals and live a wrong social life. My quarrel with Hindus and Hinduism is not over the imperfections of their social conduct. It is much more fundamental. It is over their ideals. And Ambedkar had a outsized role in establishing the Constitution of India. And voila, you have an institutionalized caste system today, which does indeed exist in India today. And in fact, Dr. Ambedkar collapsed caste in Hinduism completely. And he wrote a book called Annihilation of Caste. Not a book, a pamphlet, The Annihilation of Caste. Caste system must be annihilated. Why? Because only then India will become egalitarian, civilized, will come out of savagery and barbarism. But now Isabel Wilkerson is arguing, no. The problem is not with India, the problem is with America. And caste system has come to America now. And it first went to Germany, and now it has come to America. Caste system is equal to Hinduism. Why? Because according to Western authors, westernized, colonialized Indians, colonized Indians, it is so. And I consider Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to be among these colonized Indians, westernized Indians. So caste system is equal to Hinduism, then therefore Hinduism must be annihilated. Why? Because logically, caste cannot be annihilated without destroying Hinduism, which is the same thing. And Hindus must answer for caste. So we should every day morning, we should wake up and feel guilty for having invented caste. And if we do feel sufficiently guilty for having invented caste, then we'll give up Hinduism on our own and move away from Sanatana Dharma. This is the logic, this is the thesis of the Annihilation of Caste pamphlet. But if you really examine the reality, caste is not a Hindu word. It doesn't exist in the Hindu scriptures. Whether it is the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, the Yoga Sutras, the Mahabharata, Ramayana, no matter Itihasa, Purana, literature, Sahityas, nowhere does the word caste exist in the classical literature of Hinduism. In fact, the word caste comes from the Spanish and Portuguese casta, which means race, lineage, tribe, or breed. When the Spanish colonized the New World, and by New World I mean the world of Ibero-America, that is South America, a little bit of North America, Brazil, Spain, Colombia, all those places where the Europeans landed, they began to use the word casta to mean a clan or lineage. And that word entered India when the Portuguese first entered India in the year 1498. Okay, so when the Portuguese came to India, and they started encountering the thousands of Jatis in India, they started calling them casta, and that word eventually morphed into the word caste somewhere around this period, first attested in the English language in the year 1630. Okay, so therefore the Pew Research Center article is completely wrong when it says Hindus had a caste system for 3,000 years. That's wrong. There was no caste system in India before the British brought that idea into India. Every Hindu must know this. Okay. However, this poses a problem. The problem is, how do we understand the terms Varna and Jati in relation to caste? Now, here we will examine a quotation by Swami Vivekananda. A very, very dangerous quotation, in fact. So he's giving an interview to the newspaper The Hindu in 1897, in the year 1897, and he's saying, I do not propose any leveling of castes. Caste is a very good thing. Caste is the plan we want to follow. What caste really is, not one in a million understands. There is no country in the world without caste. In India, from caste, we reach to the point where there is no caste. Caste is based on that principle. The plan in India is to make everybody a Brahmin, the Brahmin being the ideal of. This is an extremely problematic quotation when looked at from the standpoint of modern contemporary sensibilities, especially diversity, equality, inclusion, blah, blah, blah. If you look at this quotation from these kinds of sensibilities, this is a deadly quotation. It indicts Swami Vivekananda. However, Swami Vivekananda is not talking about caste at all. He was using caste as a word, as a translation to another word, Sanskrit word. Okay, and that word was what? And there's a question: does Swami Vivekananda mean Varna or Jati by the word caste? Now, give me an answer, everybody. In the chat window, tell me: is Swami Vivekananda translating Varna as caste or Jati as caste? Yeah, Varna. Varna as caste. It's translating Varna as caste. And therein lies the problem. So the problem is, we Hindus ourselves, okay, somebody is saying Jati. Okay, good. Okay. We Hindus, from as early as 1897, in fact, it was much earlier, started translating a Sanskrit word or words, say Varna / Jati, into the word caste, unthinkingly, without understanding and realizing what was the baggage that the word caste carried. And that started happening in the late 1800s itself. Fast forward, caste got established as a reality of India. Now, here is an eminent sociologist, a person by the name M.N. Srinivas, Padma Bhushan M.N. Srinivas. He's a sociologist, and he spent his whole time doing ethnographic studies in the countryside of Bharat. He went and studied various communities in different parts of India, many parts of Karnataka primarily. And here is what he says. In his book, in his paper, Caste in Modern India, written in the year 1962, he's saying, the Varna model has produced a wrong and distorted image of caste. It is necessary for the sociologist to free himself from the hold of the Varna model if he wishes to understand the caste system. A really remarkable sentence for a sociologist. Okay, and what is remarkable about it is, this is a question. Did the Varna model distort caste, or did caste distort Varna? He seems to think the problem is with the Varna model. We had to get rid of the Varna model from our minds if we want to understand the caste system. He's conceptualizing the caste system as real, the Varna model as a problematic theoretical model to understand the caste system. In fact, in other words, he's acknowledging there is a distinction, there is a discrepancy between the Varna model as enunciated in our texts and the caste system as he's observing on the ground, ethnographically on the ground. There is a discrepancy, there is a disconnect. But he's complaining that the problem is with the model, not with the reality. Okay, and we are asking the question, did the Varna model distort caste, or did the caste distort Varna? Interesting question. Next. Here is another eminent sociologist, another Padma Bhushan, Andre Patel, who's still alive, by the way, 1934. And he's saying, my argument is a simple one. He's writing in 1996. Now that's 34 years after Dr. M.N. Srinivas wrote his previous quotation. My argument is a simple one. In the classical literature of India, caste was represented by Varna. And for 2000 years, when Hindus wrote about it, they did so characteristically in the idiom of Varna. This is no longer the case. And caste is now represented much more typically as Jati or its equivalent in the regional language. Okay, once again, it's making the same mistake. The question is, did the classical literature of India represent caste at all? See, look at his sentence. In the classical literature of India, caste was represented by Varna. And for 2000 years, the Hindus wrote about it. They wrote characteristically in the idiom of Varna. Well, is it not arguable that when the Hindus were writing about Varna, they were just writing about Varna and not about caste at all? And it is us moderns, like Padma Bhushan Andre Patel and Padma Bhushan M.N. Srinivas, who are simply imagining that the ancient texts of India, when they wrote about Varna, they were actually writing about caste. Don't you think that's somewhat idiotic? What do you think? What do you think? Okay. I mean, it's a clear case of projecting a contemporary discourse upon an ancient text and then claiming the ancient text was writing about a contemporary idea that you picked up recently from the Europeans, and now complaining that the texts are writing about caste. Okay, and these are scholars, and we have to respect them as scholars. See, both M.N. Srinivas and Andre Patel are scholars. They come one after the other, right after Ambedkar and Nehru. And they take up the whole issue of studying caste on the ground ethnographically through sociological studies. And they come up with this amazing insight called, hey, there is a disconnect between what the texts are saying and what we are observing on the ground in the form of what we now call the caste system. And it is all the more remarkable that as eminent as they were, as decorated as they were, multiple governments of India conferred on these two sociologists the Padma Bhushan Award, meaning that they were greatly respected for the amount of work that they did in the field in India. And you can see just from those two quotations, neither one of them was able to recognize that it is caste that is distorting the textual conception of Varna. It is not that the textual conception of Varna is distorting the phenomenon of caste. Yeah. So this is an important insight, okay, which these sociologists themselves seem to have not stumbled upon. Now, here is another quotation, okay, 1996. Same sociologist, Padma Bhushan Andrew Patel, saying, I have pointed out that all these various groups, those listed by Mr. Mandal's commission, this is the Mandal Commission report, okay, and those being catalogued by the Anthropological Survey of India may be called Jatis. But can they all be legitimately designated in the English language as castes? There appears to be a problem of translation here. 1996. Okay, this is the beginnings of a recognition after observing people and communities in different parts of India, after doing numerous sociological studies, ethnographic studies, after observing Jatis interacting with each other in various ways in different parts of India, after being decorated with the Padma Bhushan, Andre Patel is coming to this curious question. Can you really call Jatis in the English language as caste? There appears to be a problem of translation. And if you accept his question as legitimate, then what it raises is if Varna is not caste, Jati is not caste, then what is it? What is it? It meaning, what is caste really? What is caste? If it is not Varna and if it is not Jati, what is caste? Here's another professor, Dr. A.L. Basham, very, very famous professor, famous because he was the thesis advisor of one of the most eminent historians, eminent in double quotes in India, called Romila Thapar. Romila Thapar wrote her PhD thesis as a student at the London School of Asian and African Studies or something like that, Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies, and A.L. Basham, Albert Llewellyn Basham, was her advisor, thesis advisor. And here is his quotation, writing in the year 1954. He's saying, very interesting. He's offering an original insight. The term caste was applied indiscriminately to both Varna or class and Jati or caste proper. The word caste was applied indiscriminately to both Varna or class and Jati or caste proper. So he's translating Varna as class and Jati as caste. Okay, he's doing that. In a moment we'll question that also. But at least he's beginning to recognize that it is not proper to use the word caste to represent both Varna and Jati, sometimes Varna and sometimes Jati, sometimes neither. There is something inappropriate and it's being indiscriminate in doing that. I'm practically certain that caste did not originate from the four classes because the Gotras are exogamous. Members of the same Gotra can be found in many castes. Okay, very interesting. So he's making a rather insightful observation, and a Westerner, a Britisher as such, a British scholar who's doing this, is offering up this insight. It opens the question, is mapping Varna to class and Jati to caste appropriate, as he has done? And our answer is no, it's not really, because the word class has a certain connotation in the Western imagination, as does the word caste. It also has a certain set of cluster of meanings. and conceptions as per the Western imagination. And when you map a Sanskrit term Varna and Jati into these Western terms, you are invariably distorting and misrepresenting. But it has happened. So, you know, in our course, the course that I'm offering next quarter, that is this the course is titled Distinguishing Varna and Jati from Caste. Is a Varna and Jati based social structure the same as the caste system? And why is it so easy to confuse the two? It's so easy to confuse the two because so many people are confusing it. Swami Vivekananda is confusing the two. Jawaharlal Nehru confused it. Ambedkar confused it. M.N. Srinivas confused it. What's his name? Andre Bataille confused it. But slowly they are coming to the recognition that maybe there is a problem in translation here. How did the Varna Jati social order later become the caste system? What was the historical process by which the Varna and Jati social order became the caste system of modern India? And how has this distorted our understanding about Hinduism itself, about the Hindu civilization itself, Hindu society itself? What is the cosmology and worldview that gave rise to the caste system? What was the European experience behind the caste system? Not the Hindu experience, not the Indian experience, but the European experience behind the construction of the caste system. And why did the Hindus readily accept the caste system as a label that accurately represented their society? What is the cosmology and worldview that gave rise to the Varna and Jati social order that is within the Hindu world? Does its value system promote discrimination and oppression by its very design? Lastly, is the Varna and Jati social order relevant today at all in this modern age, in this contemporary era that we live in? Is it even relevant today? Or should we consider it as a relic of the past that the faster we get out of, the better? But it appears people like Isabel Wilkerson, and Equality Labs, the state of California, and so many other players will not let go of this. They want to punish somebody for the so-called evil of the caste system of India. From Varna and Jati to caste social re-engineering. So, if you look at it really speaking, the Hindu text spoke about Varna. The Hindu texts speak about Varna. There's an elaborate corpus of textual material spanning our Itihasas, Puranas, Shruti, Smriti, Bhagavad Gita, Vedanta, Veda, Upanishads, and so on, where there is a discourse about Varna. The Hindu texts do speak about Varna. That is unquestionable, indubitable, undoubtable. Okay. Then if you go and look at Hindu society, it exhibits many jatis. Okay. So this is a reality. The society exhibits many jatis. The texts speak about Varna, and somewhere the two integrate, they come together, they collide. And there's a great deal of ambiguity in regards to the exact nature of the relationship between Varna and Jati. Okay. There's a great ambiguity. Most Hindus will not be able to adequately explain this relationship. But fast forward from 1871 onwards, from the 1871 census onwards, the British began to enumerate castes in India. They started asking everybody, what's your caste? And when people said, I don't know what my caste is, they would ask something like, what's your last name? And then they would make up castes. And then they would consolidate people by caste and so on. By 1935, the definitions were in place. And the precursor document to the Constitution of India, developed and ratified in 1950, was called the Government of India Act of 1935. And that is where these terms get crystallized: general caste, backward caste, scheduled tribes, etc. They become part of the Indian Constitution. And fast forward to 1950, voila, caste is all over the Constitution. The single most referred to phrase or word in the entire Constitution of India. The Constitution entrenches the caste system as a primary social construct, and then it begins to unfold in ways that reinforce, in ways that reinforce the idea of the caste system. The reservations, caste-based reservations, caste-based privileges, caste-based denials and prohibitions, caste-based political parties, caste-based politicians, agendas, and so on. So caste acquires a kind of a reality in India after independence, which it never had for 3,000 years. Okay, and we don't know that it never had because we're being told by books, by eminent historians, that caste is a problem in India from at least 3,000 years or more. And so unquestioningly, we've accepted this narrative that these four castes, general castes, other backward castes, scheduled castes, and scheduled tribes, these four somehow are equivalent to or correspond to the Varna order, the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, that order. Somehow that order and this are one and the same. Okay, and that is what we want to deconstruct. We want to begin to uncollapse those two conceptual clusters, a set of ideas. And if you think about Varna and Jati through the millennia, right, 2,000 years of economic history in one chart, right? This is a growth, relative GDP. The saffron segment is India, and as you can see, it was very, very wealthy at one point in time. And by the time you hit about 1500 AD, 1,500 years, it starts to lose a little bit of its shine to China. The red is China here. And then eventually it catches back up. And then comes the period of the British. The British simply extracted the wealth of India completely. Right? And only now is showing some signs of recovery at this point in time. So in this chart, you see the rise of America here, the rise of United Kingdom and its own stagnation, the rise of Japan, and so on. A lot of interesting things to observe on this chart. This is based on Anders Madison's work, okay, Economic History of the World. You see, we can divide this into roughly three major periods. Period or four. This is a classical period, the pre-Islamic period. And then comes Islam for a long time. Then comes Christianity. And then comes post-independent India. Okay, and what happens is that India at one time was the largest economy in the world for at least 1,400 to 1,500 years. Once it comes under the sway of the British, it collapses completely economically. See, and as India's collapse happened, was engineered, as the utter impoverization and destitution of the Indian people was being engineered by first the East India Company and then the British Crown. At the same time, the British started rewriting India's history. Okay, and then once you come to the post-independent India, caste becomes the definitive marker of the Hindu civilization. It gets solidified, crystallized, embedded in the constitution, and everything starts happening centering on caste. The British led the Hindus to believe that the caste was the root of all their social and economic problems for more than 2,000 years. That allowed them to present themselves as emancipators, as liberators, as some kind of reformers who wanted the best for India. Okay, and India needed the British in order to develop, in order to advance, in order to progress, and so on. And in this narrative, the approximately 45 trillion US dollars that was drained from India by the British, got obscured, got thrown under the rug, hidden under the rug, hidden in the closet. In other words, young Hindus were taught that the British intervention in India was beneficial to the Hindus, and we should not be, antagonistic towards them. We should, in fact, acknowledge and thank the British for their benign intervention in India. And we paid over a 200-year period. We paid a small fee of about 45 trillion US dollars for the happy intervention that the British engineered in India. And in the 19th and 20th centuries, most Hindus believed this. Okay, most Hindus. And when I say most Hindus, of course, I mean you and me. But more importantly, I mean people like Jawaharlal Nehru, like B.R. Ambedkar. Like a lot of people in that era believed this. And simultaneously, the India's prosperity over the millennium also got hidden from view. It's only until recent times that scholars like the one I pointed to, Angus Madison, are reclaiming the truth from a distorted narrative. And in this distorted narrative, the India's prosperity, relative prosperity, and compared to the other major countries of the world, that prosperity remained hidden from our view. Instead, we were fed an idea that India's poverty was endemic and from times immemorial. And that begs the question, what role did the Varna Jati social order play for at least 2-3 millennia before all these distortions came into vogue? Okay, that's a very important question. And how do we know what happened, what role it played, if we don't have enough texts about what role it played? See, the colonial discourse, if viewed from a Marxist lens, created a dichotomy between colonizer and colonized. So in our case, was the British and India. This is what happened. So the British exploited India, and India got exploited. This is what happened. However, the discourse that was generated about what happened presented the British as civilizers, emancipators. They had come to save India. And save India from what? They had to invent an enemy. And here is what happened. Okay. So the British presented themselves as emancipators who had come to liberate the low castes from the high caste, the Brahmins, who were the real exploiters of India. So in other words, while the $45 trillion was getting extracted from India over a 200-year period, a narrative was being manufactured to villainize the Brahmins and convert the lower castes. This is a discourse about what happened. This is just what happened. And the questions not asked in the whole sequence is, in what ways did the Islamic invasions of India impact the Varna Jati social order? What ways did the colonial era impact the Varna Jati social order? Did the Varna Jati social order remain unchanged throughout the era of Islamic and British rule in India? And how do we understand the ways in which the social order evolved? Okay, so these are questions generally not asked, because they are kind of go against the grain of the Indologists and the group of scholars who are working on all matters India, Hindu, Hindutva, etc., etc. So now coming to the course, I'm offering a 1.5-hour course. Ankur, you can put the link in the chat window for the course. About 2 hours per week, and we will address all of these questions in that course. It's a very detailed, very enjoyable, very thorough course, and I think I would like to kind of end this by inviting all of you to register and join that course. It will be mind-blowing. We'll be exploring a lot of these questions systematically. At the end of this course, students will be able to do a lot of things. Okay, describe the historical processes that solidify the Hindu caste system as an essential feature of Hindu Dharma. Distinguish essential features of Varna, Jati, social order as expressed in the Hindu texts. examine the genealogy of the key ideas that went into the construction of the caste system during the colonial era. Contrast the paradigms from which Varna and Jati originate. The caste system originate. And then generate pathways for critical future study and transformative action to clarify what I call enduring misconceptions that simply have existed from time immemorial without any clear counter argument, right? So the course will hopefully provide you pathways for critical future study and the transformative action to clarify these misconceptions, as well as purify ourselves in terms of our own behaviors and attitudes, insofar as we need to be purified. And these impurities are centered on the caste system. The course will provide the foundations necessary to respond to the persistent activism directed against caste, therefore against Hinduism. Okay, so I'm going to close here. That's the end of the slide presentation. I'll open it up for some Q&A, and I'd like to invite people to put their questions in the Q&A box. And Esther ji, if you want to pose a question, you're welcome to at this point.
Yeah, I'd love to have Esther G plug in and connect on this topic. Her experience is impressive, and having her as our director of community relations is definitely going to help HUA grow and share this message and your perspective again. So appreciated. So Esther G, maybe you can also help with the Q&A, handle that part of it. Yeah.
So there is a question here.
Thank you so much, Puji, for the intro. Yeah. What is it, Kalyani?
There is a question from a few questions in the Q&A box. I'll pick them up. Okay, there is a question from Kishore Trivedi. He's asking, what do we do about politicians in India who use the caste card very effectively? Okay, it's a great question. Okay. Fantastic question. We'll look at that in much more depth in the course. Okay, but I'll just give you a very brief answer, right? See, in a democratic politics, in any country, you have to build up a coalition of communities who come together and support your policy platform, a position, etc. Right? Now, unfortunately, in India, it is very easy to stitch together caste-based coalitions, by appealing to the caste identity or Jati. I'm going to use carefully the Jati identity and say that, hey, I'll fight for you, our Jati. I'll fight for our Jati against other Jatis. Therefore, vote for me. Okay, that's very easy. It doesn't require much by way of well-articulated policy positions. It doesn't require by way of a vision for the country. It doesn't require anything sophisticated by way of a platform for change, etc. It just becomes an identity-based, a kind of a mediocre politics. And because it is easy to work with communities, community identities, caste has become a major political kind of phenomenon in India in the electoral game. However, we must note that the intensity of caste as a major political factor is getting displaced as we speak in Bharat right now. It is getting displaced by a new conversation, a new narrative. And the new narrative is the politics of, what I call, or what I should not call, what Narendra Modi ji is calling Vikas and Virasat. Vikas and Virasat. Vikas being development, the politics of growth, of development. And what that means is, let's win elections on the basis of I can do better than you on developing our state or our country or our region or our territory. for our people, etc. That is vikas. And virasat means I'll do better in preserving the Sanatana Dharma, the tradition, the culture, the civilizational heritage of Bharat. And that's a different conversation than the divisive conversation pitting one caste against another, which has been very convenient for a lot of years, for 75 years in Bharat. So that's my first answer. Okay, so Estherji, why don't you take a question, either from your own or let's pick one from the Q&A box.
First of all, nice presentation, Kalyanji. And about the caste being used as a political tool with politicians, I think there is a difference between the politicians of North India and the politicians of South India. In the South, it's mostly caste. In the North, it's kind of become religion is used as the political tool. So
Okay.
to say that politicians across the country are using caste.
No, I mean, that is the change. Okay, so the thing is, there was, the narrative in Bharat has been in the last 20 years. It has been Mandal versus Kamandal, Mandal Commission, which is a caste-based sort of a rhetoric that Vishwanath Pratap Singh used as a tool to win elections, and then Kamandal being the religion, Hindutva. Okay, so that change has happened more in the north than in the south. Okay, but even now, if you look at the rhetoric of people like Rahul Gandhi, he's trying to revive this caste-based rhetoric, constantly saying, oh, OBCs, what happened to the OBCs? You've never got anything. I will fight for OBCs and so on and so forth, forgetting that the Prime Minister himself is an OBC. It's a very strange argument, and naturally we'll see how much purchase it. Okay, let me pick up another question. Okay.
So, Ms. Sophia has asked a question. Are there any books, references on the topic? So I'm sure, I'm thinking you will cover this aspect because I saw one of the questions in your course is going to be the, the genealogy of key ideas that went into the construction of caste system during the colonial era. So that's one of the aspects you are touching upon in your course. But to name a book, I think one resource has been for me to understand caste, the construction of caste system in India, the concept of caste system in India has been this book by Nicholas Dirks, Caste of the Mind. So
Caste of Mind.
The Caste of the Mind. So this is a good book that comes to
so
mind.
I'll say a couple of sentences about Nicholas Dirks. Okay, Nicholas Dirks was until recently the vice chancellor of the University of California, Berkeley. Okay, UC Berkeley. That's about as prestigious a university as that there is in the United States of America. But formerly, in his younger days, as a graduate student and as a researcher, he spent some time in Bharat, in India. And he situated himself in Madras, what used to be called Madras, what is now called Chennai. In fact, he married an Indian lady. And he came back and he wrote this book called Castes of Mind. Unfortunately, it's a very difficult book to read. The language is difficult, it's convoluted. It seems like, it's so much academic speak. It's sometimes very frustrating to get through his chapters. But I've read the book, and it is a great resource. If people can spend the time, get the book and read it, you'll get a wonderful bird's eye view. You'll get a view of how the British established caste in India as a fundamental piece of social structure and stratification. Okay, I'm going to take one more question from the Q&A box. Okay, when did the caste stratification become rigid? Okay, Krishnanji, I'm going to tell you, take the course. Okay, because we'll examine that question much more deeply. But I'll answer it in this way, right? See, there is this idea called mobility. in a society where there is upward mobility, people are moving up the economic scale, the social scale, discrimination becomes less and less significant. On the other hand, when a country experiences downward mobility for over 1,000 years, which is what India did under Islam and Christianity, okay, under Islam and the British, the problems generated by poverty, illiteracy, scarcity, and ruthless exploitation by the British resulted in a lot of the rigidification of Hindu society. Okay, that's a thesis. I'm just going to state the thesis right now, and we will examine this in much, much more detail within the course itself. Next question. I'm not going to answer the anonymous questions, okay? You should have the courtesy to expose your name, please.
So Radhaji, there is no prerequisite to take this course. It is part of our certificate program in Hindu studies. And Kalyanji also teaches the orientation to Hindu studies course, but it is not a requisite. So you can join this course and learn, right? Caste, and so thank you, Radhaji, for that question. No prerequisites, right? Uditji, we had R. Vaidyanathan on a previous webinar, and we discussed his book, Caste as Social Capital. Very interesting. We also had Sri Satish Sharmaji, his book on caste conversion, a colonial conspiracy. And of course, Rajiv Malhotra's book, Jati, Varna, Caste, is another one where it's different, right? The course that Kalyanji is teaching is different than reading a book because of his engagement, his presentation, your ability to ask questions, and the progression as he did in this one webinar, laying out all these ideas and citations and evidence and engaging in that way. So it'll be part of our HUA learning management system. You'll get login and all those sorts of things if you haven't taken a course at HUA yet. Kalyanji, any other questions? Esther G, any questions? Or I definitely wanted to have your just general take, Esther G, on Kalyanji's presentation, other than it was good, because I know it was good, but Kalyanji developed his presentation a couple different times, and this is different than the previous one. You're adding new aspects to it, and it's just really informative.
See, there is another question I'll pick up. Okay, Prabhat Tekriwal is asking, should we divorce ourselves from using the word caste as a translation of Jati? If so, how? Okay, use the word Jati, educate people, publish more articles, do conversation with neighbors, communities. Yeah, all of the above. Okay, so first of all, in our own minds, right, we have to develop an adequate understanding of the enormity of the problem. Enormity of the problem. You see, we ourselves don't understand the difference between the words Varna and Jati and the word caste. We don't understand it. Even our gurus and acharyas, the number of people who just loosely use the word caste in the place of Varna, imagining, like I showed you, Swami Vivekananda demonstrated in his quotation back in 1897, imagining that if you're saying caste and you're using it as a English word representing Varna, you're in fact talking about the same thing when you're not. Okay, that's a problem. It's a very serious problem. Now, Varna has to be distinguished from caste. Jati has to be distinguished from caste. The relationship between Varna and Jati has to be established. And how caste as a system is so different from the social order that was conceptualized through Varna and Jati must be understood. We Hindus have to understand. That's the first thing. Second thing is, caste is enshrined in our constitution, the India's constitution, is all over the place. There are 64 references to caste in the Constitution of India. It is as though it's not a Constitution of India, it's a Constitution of castes in India. In fact, it could be argued the Constitution of India constituted the castes of India, and it enumerated castes. I mean, there was an exercise in enumeration that preceded it. So that's a huge problem, because now undoing that is going to be very, very hard. So it's a significant problem, and I think at some point a critical mass of intellectuals must recognize that this constitutional enshrinement of caste as somehow an ancient phenomenon must be distinguished from that the social order conceptualized by the rishis in the form of Varna and Jati. Okay, there's some Samsung person here with asking me, how is this course different from Rajiv Malhotra's work? I mean, I think it goes a little deeper, and it has some ideas that are very different, but also there are many ideas that are consistent also. So therefore, it's overlapping, and I think the course will take you much, much deeper. Okay, that's all I'll say. Because I've read Rajiv Malhotra's book, I've read other books on this. I believe the course is much deeper than Rajiv's book. Okay. Anything, Esther, you want to pose as a question?
Oh, okay. So yeah, one of your course learning outcomes is generate pathways for critical future study and transformative action.
Yeah.
So can you give a brief intro to what that is going to look like?
Well, I think, see, critical study, okay, what I mean by that is people will not only understand these ideas at a much deeper level, they'll get exposed to new readings, they'll get introduced to books, new books that they maybe haven't heard before. They'll read papers during the course. So there'll be an intellectual process of churning during the course that can lead to further study on your own. Okay, that's the first part. The second part is, what I mean by, how did I phrase it? Action, right? What did I say in that thing? I said
transformative action.
Transformative action. I mean, that is a possibility. Once you understand conceptually, become clear, when students encounter this issue in their own life, in their life environments, in the workplace, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, school districts, you may be inspired to offer a perspective and speak up a little bit. Okay, and for Hindus mostly, speaking up in the public square is already a big action. And speaking up articulately, speaking up in a way that's constructive, that is not emotionally charged, speaking up in a way that really brings about a change in an environment, in a neighborhood, in a community, in an organization, an institution, wherever you are, this issue is going to come to your doorstep, whether you like it or not. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Then you'll have an opportunity to participate in some meaningful way, and that would be transformative, just by way of that kind of participation.
Yeah, this the conversation is very interesting in India. I have been trolled a lot based on caste. So when I returned to when I quit Christianity, a lot of people asked me, wanted to know which caste I was admitted into upon returning from Christianity. So I was, there were even comments asking me, so now did you have to go through the Shuddhi process? And so what did you do? What did they do to Shuddhi you, to purify you? So I think this is the understanding of caste system generally in India. So yeah, a lot of distortions there, a lot of narrative has to be set right.
Correct.
A lot of work to do in this particular
That's right.
subtopic within Hinduism.
Yeah. In fact, I'll give one little tidbit. Okay, in this course, we'll read sections from various texts. We'll read sections from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Upanishads, from the Vedas. We will read sections from the Mahabharata, from the Artha Shastra, from the Hindu texts. We'll also read sections from the Bible, from the Old and New Testament. We'll read sections from the Quran. So it's going to be a very, very interesting and engaging course. It'll take you to places you've not been before. And so, I encourage you to join, all of you, to join the course, register, and participate. And it'll be a fantastic journey. And I look forward to it. Okay.
Will this, one last question. Will
Sure,
this
please.
Equip the student
Mhm.
to write papers, peer-reviewed?
Not yet. Okay.
No.
See
No,
see
even
the
to at least post in places like academia or other
no.
journals.
I think the threshold to write papers is much higher. Okay, and that really requires students taking the graduate programs. Okay, it's the graduate programs where we prepare students to become academic scholars and to practice writing and practice writing to an to an academic standard, a Western academic standard, and then to try to publish through a peer-reviewed process. Okay, that's a much higher threshold, and we don't expect that from the continuing community education division courses. But we do encourage people to write small blogs, maybe 1,000 words, 1,500 words. That is something we can all aspire to, really speaking.
Okay, with that, Kalyanji, you want to give a last, well, I'll give the last pitch to enroll in the course. Here are the details in the chat one more time. It is going to be on
did we do the survey?
Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern. Yes, I launched the poll. I can show the result. If you didn't fill out the poll, please fill it out. We had about 40 people fill it out. And maybe some closing thoughts, Kalyanji?
Yeah, I'll take up one more question, right? There is this course is part of the certificate program in Hindu studies, definitely. And it's a great course to kind of enter. It's one of two courses that I offer, which is the orientation to Hindu studies and the Varna, distinguishing Varna and Jati from caste. So I look forward to seeing all of you in the course. Okay, with that, thank you all for listening. Namaste, everybody. And see you again in a future event. And Esther, thank you so much for joining. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Namaste. Bye-bye.